The morning light streamed through my bedroom window, casting a golden glow over the neatly made bed beside me. I stretched, feeling the weight of my growing belly as I shifted positions. At 8 months pregnant, everything felt heavy, my body, my emotions, my exhaustion. But despite the discomfort, I was happy. Trevor had been distant the past few days, more stressed than usual, but I told myself it was just nerves. We were about to become parents, after all. He was working hard, handling our finances, making sure everything was in place for when the baby arrived. That was the kind of man he was, responsible, thoughtful, or at least that's what I had let myself believe. I reached for my phone, expecting to see a good morning text from him, the kind he used to send every day. Instead, there was just one unread message, and as soon as I opened it, my entire world shifted. "I'm leaving. I'm sorry." My fingers tightened around the phone. I blinked, reading it again, as if I had somehow misunderstood. I tried calling him, straight to voicemail. Again and again, each call met with the same empty response. My pulse pounded in my ears as I shoved the blankets aside and forced myself out of bed. Trevor wouldn't do this. Not now. Not to me. Not to our baby. I moved through the house in a daze, searching for something, anything that would make this make sense. The closet. His clothes were gone, the bathroom, his toothbrush, his razor, the cologne he always used, all missing. In the living room, the framed photos of us were still there, but I realized something chilling. His keys weren't on the counter where he always left them. Neither was his laptop or his suitcase. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a misunderstanding. Trevor had planned this. A cold sweat broke out across my skin as I ran to the kitchen, grabbing my purse and yanking out my wallet. My hands shook as I opened my banking app. My heart stuttered as I stared at the transactions. Thousands of dollars drained from our joint account. My personal savings account wiped out. A new credit card opened in my name, already maxed out. I gasped, my breath coming in short, sharp bursts. Trevor didn't just leave me, he robbed me blind. I stumbled back, gripping the edge of the counter to keep from collapsing. The betrayal hit harder than I thought possible. I had trusted him with everything, my love, my future, my financial security, and in a matter of hours he had taken it all and vanished. My stomach twisted violently, and for a moment I thought I might throw up. But then I felt it, a small, strong kick against my ribs. My baby, our baby, the reminder of who I was really fighting for. I inhaled sharply and forced myself to stand taller. I wasn't going to fall apart, not now, not when there was too much at stake. Trevor might have thought he could disappear, thought he could take everything and leave me stranded, but he underestimated me. I grabbed my phone again, this time calling the bank. I had no idea what my next steps were, but I knew one thing for certain. Trevor had just made the worst mistake of his life. The first few days after Trevor left were a blur. Shock kept me moving, pushing me through the motions of calling the bank, freezing my credit, and trying to undo as much damage as possible. But no matter how many fraud reports I filed, how many hold times I sat through, or how many financial advisors I spoke with, the reality didn't change. He had emptied our accounts. The bank couldn't recover what he had taken because technically, as my husband, he had legal access to most of it. The police wouldn't do anything either. This falls under a domestic financial dispute, the officer had told me over the phone, his tone flat and indifferent. You'd need to pursue it in civil court. As if I had the time, the money, or the energy for that. I was 8 months pregnant, alone, and barely holding myself together. The worst part was the silence, no explanation, no closure. One night I sat in our dark living room scrolling through my old messages with Trevor, rereading the last sweet things he had said to me. I love you, Brooke. Can't wait to meet our son. I'm so lucky to have you. They felt like a cruel joke now, a script he had played perfectly until the moment he decided to disappear. I tried to remember if there had been signs. Anything that could have warned me, the distant looks, the late nights at work, the way he had rushed me into putting all our money into a joint account, convincing me it was easier that way. I had trusted him completely, and he had walked away without looking back. I didn't have time to fall apart. The baby was coming soon and I needed to be ready. I threw myself into preparing, organizing the nursery, and making lists of everything I needed to take care of before the birth. But no matter how much I tried to distract myself, I couldn't escape the gnawing dread that sat in my chest like a weight. I wasn't just heartbroken. I was furious. Trevor hadn't just left me, he had left his child. And the more I thought about that, the more the sadness burned away, leaving only anger. Then, 2 weeks later, I got another shock. I was opening my mail when I saw an unfamiliar envelope from a mortgage company. Confused, I tore it open. My breath caught as I read the letter. It was a foreclosure notice. According to the documents, Trevor had taken out a second mortgage on our house without telling me. And now that he was gone and the payments hadn't been made, the bank was preparing to seize the property. I gripped the edge of the table, my vision swimming. He had put our house in jeopardy, the home where I had planned to raise our son, the home I had spent months decorating, imagining the life we would build inside it. And now it was at risk of being taken from me. I wasn't going to let that happen. The next morning, I marched into my lawyer's office, slamming the foreclosure notice down on his desk. "Fix this," I demanded, my voice sharp and steady. "I don't care what it takes. I want Trevor's name off of everything." My lawyer, a graying man in his late 50s, adjusted his glasses and sighed. "Brooke, I can try, but legally you're still married. That complicates things." I leaned forward, my hands clenched into fists. "He committed fraud. He took out loans without my knowledge. There has to be a way." He studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "There's one option. We file for divorce immediately. And while we do that, we file for an emergency financial injunction. It might free certain assets and prevent him from doing further damage." I exhaled slowly. Do it. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of legal paperwork, financial battles, and sleepless nights. I was constantly on the phone with my lawyer, my bank, and credit agencies, trying to untangle the mess Trevor had left behind. I barely had time to think about the fact that I was days away from giving birth. Then, on a cold Wednesday morning, I went into labor. I had been feeling off all day, more exhausted than usual, my back aching with a dull intensity. I tried to ignore it, pushing through, telling myself I had too much to do. But by the afternoon, the pain sharpened, coming in rhythmic waves. My breath caught, and I realized with a jolt of panic that this was happening. Too soon. I wasn't ready. I grabbed my hospital bag and called an Uber. The drive was a blur. By the time I reached the hospital, the contractions were so intense that I could barely speak. Nurses rushed me into a room, hooking me up to monitors, asking me questions I could barely process. Everything felt surreal. One moment I was gripping the bed rails, pain tearing through me, and the next I was hearing the sound of my baby's first cries. The nurse placed him in my arms, and for the first time in weeks I felt something other than anger, fear, or exhaustion. Love. Overwhelming, heart-shattering love. He was so small, so perfect, his tiny fingers curling around mine. Tears blurred my vision. "Hi, baby," I whispered. "It's just us now." I named him Caleb. In the days that followed, I barely had time to think about Trevor. Every ounce of my energy went into caring for my son. I fell into a routine, feedings, diaper changes, stolen moments of sleep. It was the hardest thing I had ever done, but I did it. I didn't need Trevor. I didn't need anyone. Then, 2 months later, I got another phone call. I was rocking Caleb to sleep when my phone buzzed on the nightstand. I glanced at the screen, expecting it to be my lawyer or my bank, but it wasn't. It was an unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. "Hello?" Silence. Then a voice I never thought I would hear again. My entire body went rigid. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My grip tightened on the phone. He exhaled shakily. I know I messed up. Rage surged through me, so sudden and fierce that I could taste it. Messed up? That's what he called it? Destroying my life? Stealing from me? Abandoning his own child? He kept talking. "I want to see you. I want to see my son." I almost laughed, the audacity, the sheer, unbelievable audacity. For a moment I considered hanging up. But no, not yet. He had taken everything from me and walked away without looking back. He thought he could just reappear and act like nothing had happened. Not this time. I forced my voice to stay calm. "Where are you?" He hesitated. "I'm still in Austin." My stomach twisted. He had never left. All this time, while I had been struggling to survive, while I had been raising our son alone, he had been here, living his life, watching from a distance. "I want to explain everything," he continued. "Please, just give me a chance." I gritted my teeth. I had spent months wondering why he had left, what had been going through his mind when he decided to disappear. Now I had the opportunity to find out. "Fine," I said, "let's meet." He let out a breath, as if relieved, as if he actually believed I was giving him another chance. I looked down at Caleb, sleeping peacefully in my arms. Trevor thought I was still the same woman he had abandoned. He had no idea who he was about to face. I arrived at the cafe 15 minutes early. I wanted to be there first, to see him walk in, to watch his reaction before he had a chance to compose himself. I sat by the window stirring a cup of coffee I had no intention of drinking, my fingers wrapped tightly around the warm ceramic. The place was quiet, the kind of spot Trevor would have picked for a business meeting back when he still pretended to be someone respectable, back when he still had a career, a home, a life. Now, I had no idea what he had left. The bell above the door chimed, and I didn't have to look up to know it was him. I felt it first, a cold, crawling sensation down my spine, the weight of memories pressing against my ribs, but I did look up. And there he was. Trevor hesitated in the doorway, scanning the cafe, his eyes finally landing on me. He looked different, not in a way that time alone could explain. There was something in the way he carried himself, less confidence, more hesitation. His clothes weren't the tailored suits he used to wear. The button-down was wrinkled, the slacks looked a little too big, like he had lost weight he couldn't afford to lose. But his eyes, those sharp blue eyes, were the same. And when he saw me, I recognized the flicker of something there. Guilt, regret, or just the realization that he had no idea what I had planned for him. He walked over slowly, sliding into the chair across from me. "You look good, Brooke," he said, his voice softer than I expected. I didn't respond. I let the silence stretch, let him sit in the discomfort of it. He shifted, glancing down at his hands. "Thanks for meeting me." I folded my arms. "You said you wanted to explain, so explain." He exhaled, rubbing a hand over his jaw. "I messed up," he said finally. "I panicked. The baby, the money, everything felt like too much. And then I made some bad choices, really bad choices." I gave a short, humorless laugh. "Bad choices? You mean robbing me blind and abandoning your own child?" Trevor winced, but nodded. "Yeah, that." I stared at him, studying the face I had once loved, searching for something real beneath the carefully measured words. "Why now?" I asked. "Why, after all this time, do you suddenly care?" He hesitated, and there it was, that flicker of something else, not just regret, not just guilt, something closer to desperation. "I saw pictures of him," he admitted. "Caleb, he swallowed. "He looks just like me." I felt my nails dig into my palms beneath the table. So that was it. He had seen our son, realized what he had walked away from, and now he wanted back in? "I want to be in his life," Trevor said, leaning forward. "I know I don't deserve it. I know I screwed up, but I can fix this. I want to fix this." I tilted my head, feigning curiosity. "And how exactly do you plan to do that?" Trevor hesitated again. I could see him scrambling for the right words, for the version of this conversation that would make me believe him. "I got a new job," he said finally. "It's not great, but it's stable. I can help. I can start paying you back. I just need a chance." I let that hang between us for a moment before I reached into my purse, pulling out a folder and setting it on the table. "You mean this job?" I asked. Trevor's expression shifted instantly. His face went pale, his posture stiffened. He stared at the folder but didn't touch it. "You work for Bennett Realty now, right?" I continued. "As a leasing agent?" Trevor's jaw clenched. "How do you know that?" I smiled, slow and deliberate, "Because I own the building your office is in." For a long moment, he didn't say anything. He just sat there, breathing heavily, his fingers tightening around the edge of the table. "That's not possible," he finally muttered. I leaned back, savoring the moment. "I bought it 3 months ago. You must not pay much attention to your lease agreements." Trevor swallowed hard. His entire demeanor had shifted now, the false sincerity cracking under the weight of something much uglier. "Why would you do that?" he asked, his voice lower now. "Because I knew you were still here. I said simply, and I wanted to be the one to pull the rug out from under you. He sat back, shaking his head slightly. Jesus, Brooke. Did you really think you could just show up and play the role of the devoted father? I asked, my voice sharp. That you could walk back into my life, into his life, and I'd just welcome you with open arms? Trevor looked away, his jaw tight. I didn't come here to fight. No, you came here because you're desperate, I shot back. You lost everything, didn't you? The woman you ran off with, the money, your reputation, and now you think I'm your best bet. He didn't deny it. I pushed the folder toward him. I did some digging. Turns out you've been struggling, credit shot, no real assets, and you're drowning in debt. Trevor's hands curled into fists. You really looked into my finances. Of course I did, I said coolly. You took everything from me, Trevor. Did you really think I wouldn't return the favor? His breathing was heavier now, anger creeping into his expression. So what? You called me here just to humiliate me? I shook my head. No. I called you here to give you a choice. Trevor's eyes narrowed. What kind of choice? I leaned forward, lowering my voice. You're going to sign over full custody of Caleb to me. No visitation rights, no parental claims, nothing. His expression twisted. Are you serious? Completely. Trevor let out a bitter laugh. And if I don't? I smiled again, slow and sharp. Then I evict your company from the building. I make sure every potential employer in this city knows exactly what you did. I take you to court for financial fraud, and I make your life even worse than it already is. He stared at me, his breath unsteady. I could see the fight in him, the instinct to push back, but I also saw the truth. He didn't have the power anymore. I did. Finally, he exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. You really hate me that much? I met his gaze, my voice unwavering. I don't hate you, Trevor. I just don't need you anymore. The silence between us was thick, heavy. Then, without another word, Trevor reached for the folder, flipped it open, and picked up the pen. I watched as he scrawled his name at the bottom of the custody agreement. When he finished, he set the pen down and looked up at me. You win, he muttered. I took the papers, sliding them back into my purse. No, Trevor, I said as I stood. I already won. And then I walked away, leaving him sitting there, alone, with nothing left. Trevor signed the papers. He barely hesitated, barely even fought, and that should have been the end of it, but I knew better. I had spent too many nights lying awake thinking about what he had done, about what kind of man he really was. Trevor never did anything unless it benefited him. He didn't walk away from something unless he had no other choice. The moment he scrawled his name on the custody agreement and handed the pen back to me, I knew the next phase of this wasn't over. It was just beginning. I waited 2 days before I heard from him again. It was an email this time, short and clipped, as if he was trying to play it cool. I've been thinking, maybe we can work something out. Caleb deserves a father. We should talk. I stared at the message for a long time, my fingers hovering over the keyboard, debating whether to respond. He had already signed over his rights. The battle was legally won, but the fact that he was already trying to backtrack meant one thing: he hadn't truly accepted that he had lost. I ignored the email, then came the texts. First, they were polite. I just want to see him, Brooke. One visit. That's all I'm asking. Then, a few days later, more insistent. You can't just shut me out forever. I'm still his father. And finally, when I continued to refuse to engage, they turned nasty. You think you're so much better than me, don't you? Enjoy your little victory while you can. Karma has a way of coming around. That one made me laugh, Trevor talking about karma as if karma hadn't already kicked him in the teeth, as if it wasn't about to get even worse. The next time I heard about Trevor, it wasn't from him directly, it was from his employer. I was in a meeting with my real estate attorney, going over a few upcoming property acquisitions, when my assistant knocked on the door. Brooke, sorry to interrupt, but there's a call for you. Someone from Bennett Realty. Trevor's company. I excused myself and stepped into the hallway, taking the call. The voice on the other end belonged to a woman. Calm, professional, but hesitant. Ms. Harper, this is Jennifer Caldwell from Bennett Realty. I'm reaching out because there seems to be some confusion regarding your ownership of the building where our office is currently located. We've received notice that our lease agreement might be in jeopardy. I smiled to myself, already seeing where this was going. That's correct, I said. I recently acquired the property and I'll be reviewing all lease agreements moving forward. There was a pause. I see. And does that mean you're planning to make changes to our existing contract? Significant changes, I confirmed. Jennifer hesitated again. May I ask if this has anything to do with one of our employees, Trevor Miller? I leaned against the wall, watching the cityscape through the floor-to-ceiling windows. What exactly has Trevor told you? Another pause, longer this time. He expressed concern that his personal history with you might influence business decisions. We value our space in this building, Miss Harper. We'd prefer to resolve any issues amicably. I almost laughed. Trevor had gone running to his company, probably expecting them to pressure me, maybe even defend him. He still hadn't learned that he had no leverage here. I have no personal issues with Bennett Realty, I said smoothly, but Trevor Miller is a liability, and I have no interest in conducting business with a company that employs someone who has a documented history of financial fraud. There was a sharp inhale on the other end of the line. Fraud! Would you like me to send over the paperwork? I asked, my voice light, almost casual. The police reports, the bank statements, the evidence of loans taken out under my name without consent. Jennifer cleared her throat. That won't be necessary. I believe I understand the situation now. Good, I said. I'll be in touch with updated lease agreements soon. Have a nice day. I ended the call, feeling the rush of satisfaction settle in my chest. Trevor had expected me to play nice, to let him exist in my world without consequences, but he was wrong. 3 days later, I got a message from a number I didn't recognize. You're ruining my life. I stared at the screen for a long time before responding. I'm just getting started. After that, things started unraveling for Trevor even faster. I made sure of it. The moment I realized he was still holding on to the delusion that he could get his life back together without ever truly facing what he had done, I knew I had to push him over the edge. It wasn't enough for him to lose Caleb. He had to lose everything. I made a few quiet phone calls, sent a few well-placed emails. Within a week, Bennett Realty terminated his employment. A restructure, they called it, but we both knew what it really was. His professional reputation, already shaky, took another hit. The few friends he had left in the industry started distancing themselves. I even heard through mutual acquaintances that his new girlfriend, the one he had left me for, had dumped him months ago when the money ran out. And then, finally, the moment I had been waiting for. I was leaving my office late one evening, stepping out onto the quiet downtown street, when I saw him. Trevor was sitting on the steps of the building across from mine, hunched over, staring at nothing. His suit was wrinkled, his hair unkempt. He looked defeated. He must have felt me watching because he lifted his head, and for a second we just stared at each other. Then, slowly, he stood. You win, he said, his voice hoarse. I tilted my head. Did you think this was a game? Trevor let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head. You really hate me that much? I took a step closer, my heels clicking against the pavement. No, Trevor, I just don't care about you anymore. Something in his expression shifted then. I saw it. The realization that he wasn't important to me, that he wasn't anything to me, and that was worse than hate. I turned and walked away, leaving him standing there in the dark. He had spent so much time believing he could outrun the consequences of his actions, but the thing about consequences is that they always catch up to you in the end. I thought that would be the last time I saw him. That night, when I walked away from Trevor as he stood on the cold pavement staring at the ruins of his life, I truly believed it was over. I had taken everything he once had, stripped him of his illusions, and left him with nothing but the wreckage of his own choices. I had won. But men like Trevor don't just disappear quietly. They don't accept defeat, and I should have known he had one last desperate move left in him. The first sign came a week later, a letter from his lawyer delivered to my office demanding fair reconsideration of our custody agreement. The words were carefully chosen, meant to sound reasonable, but the meaning was clear. Trevor had changed his mind. He wanted rights. He wanted access. He wanted control. I sat in my office, reading the letter over and over, feeling the slow simmer of rage build in my chest. He had signed away everything. I had given him a choice, and he had taken the deal, knowing he had no other options, and now, when he had nothing left, he thought he could use Caleb as a way back in. I picked up my phone and called my lawyer. "Handle it," I said. She sighed. "Brooke, legally, he signed the agreement. He doesn't have a case." "I don't care. Make sure he understands that." That should have been the end of it. But then came the second sign. One afternoon I was picking Caleb up from daycare when I felt it, that strange, prickling sensation that someone was watching me. I glanced over my shoulder, scanning the parking lot, and then I saw him. Trevor, leaning against a car across the street, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. My grip on Caleb tightened. I forced myself to keep walking, strapping him into his car seat, my pulse thudding against my ribs. I got in, locked the doors, and pulled out of the lot without once looking back. But inside, I was seething. That night I called Trevor. He picked up on the second ring like he had been waiting. "If you ever come near my son again, I'll make sure you regret it," I said, my voice calm but sharp. There was a pause, then he laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "He's my son too, Brooke." "You gave up that right." I changed my mind. I gritted my teeth. "This isn't how it works, Trevor. You don't get to destroy my life, disappear, and then decide you want to play father when it suits you." His voice lowered. "You think you can just erase me?" I exhaled slowly, gripping the phone tighter. "I don't have to erase you, Trevor. You did that yourself." The call ended, and that should have been the final warning, but Trevor had always been a slow learner. The third and final sign came 3 days later. My assistant rushed into my office, pale-faced, clutching her phone. "Brooke, you need to see this." She handed me her phone and I stared at the screen, my stomach twisting. It was a news article, an exposé on me. The headline read, "Real Estate Mogul Brooke Harper's Financial Secrets: How She Used Her Ex-Husband's Money to Build Her Empire." I skimmed the article, my pulse hammering. Trevor had gone to the press. He had twisted the story, painting himself as the victim, claiming I had manipulated him into signing away his parental rights while secretly using his money to fund my success. He had conveniently left out the part where he had stolen from me first. The part where he had abandoned his own child. I set the phone down and took a slow breath. "Find out who wrote this," I said, "and get my lawyers on the phone." The next few hours were a blur of damage control. Calls to my PR team, statements drafted, legal threats issued, but I wasn't just playing defense. Trevor wanted a war. Fine, I would give him one. I made one call, a quiet, careful call to a friend in the finance industry, someone who had access to records that Trevor would rather keep buried, and by the next morning, I had what I needed. I sent him a single text. "Check the news." An hour later, the internet exploded. Former real estate agent Trevor Miller under investigation for financial fraud. It was all there, the unpaid debts, the shady deals, the quiet settlements, every reckless decision he had made, every law he had bent just enough to avoid breaking. Until now. Trevor called me. I let it ring. He called again, and again. On the 5th attempt, I picked up. His voice was raw with fury. "You think this is over?" I smiled to myself. "Oh, Trevor, this was over the moment you walked away from me." He started to speak, but I ended the call and blocked his number. 2 days later, his lawyer withdrew the custody request. 1 week later, he lost his job. 1 month later, he left Austin. And just like that, Trevor Miller disappeared. For good this time. It took longer than I expected for the dust to settle. Even after Trevor left Austin, I still felt the echoes of his destruction. The article he had planted in the press lingered like a stain despite my legal team shutting it down. Some people would always believe what they wanted to believe. The custody battle he had tried to restart had left a bitter taste in my mouth, a constant reminder that men like Trevor never truly let go, but none of it mattered anymore. The moment he disappeared for good, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. I finally had my life back. For the first time since Caleb was born, I could focus on building a future without the weight of Trevor's shadow creeping behind me. My real estate business continued to grow. I started taking on bigger properties, moving beyond Austin, expanding into other cities. Every project, every deal felt like another step away from the wreckage Trevor had left behind. I was no longer the woman who had been blindsided, betrayed, or broken. I was stronger now, smarter, and I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. Caleb was growing fast. He was already walking, babbling words that only half made sense, but to me, they were everything. Every morning I woke up to the sound of his laughter, and every night I tucked him in, knowing he would never have to wonder whether he was truly loved. I had made sure of that. He would never have to feel abandoned, never have to question his worth. But just when I thought I had finally moved past Trevor, the universe decided to test me one last time. I was in New York for a business meeting when it happened. I had just closed a major deal, securing my first luxury development in the city. It was the kind of deal that cemented me as a serious player in the industry, the kind of deal that proved I had built something real. I should have been celebrating. Instead, as I walked into my hotel lobby, I saw him. For a second, I thought I was imagining it, that my mind had conjured him up as some cruel joke, but it was real. He was there, standing by the bar, leaning against the counter with a drink in his hand. He looked worse than before. The tailored suits were gone, replaced by something cheaper, something that didn't quite fit. There was a tiredness in his posture, a heaviness in his face. But when his eyes met mine, I knew he hadn't changed. His lips curved into something that was almost a smile, as if this was just some chance meeting between old friends, as if he hadn't spent the past 2 years trying to destroy me. I turned to leave. I didn't need this. Didn't need to hear whatever pathetic excuse he was going to offer this time, but before I could take another step, his voice stopped me. I should have kept walking. I should have ignored him, let him disappear into whatever miserable existence he had built for himself. But a part of me, the part that had spent so long fighting back against everything he had done, needed to hear what he had to say, needed to see for myself that he was nothing now. I turned slowly, crossing my arms. "What do you want, Trevor?" He took a sip of his drink, his eyes never leaving mine. "I heard you were in town. Figured I might run into you." I laughed, shaking my head. "You heard I was in town, or you made sure to be here, hoping I'd see you." He smirked. "Does it matter?" "It does," I said, "because if you think you can just show up and play whatever game this is, you're wasting your time." Trevor exhaled, setting his drink down. "I just wanted to talk." "About what?" I asked. "How you ruined your own life, how you thought you could take me down with you and failed?" He tensed slightly but forced a smile. "I deserved that." "No, Trevor, you deserved worse." He was silent for a moment, his gaze shifting like he was debating whether to drop the act. Finally, he sighed. "I made mistakes." I raised an eyebrow. "That's what you call it?" He let out a humorless chuckle. "Look, I know I can't change the past, and I know you're never going to forgive me." I tilted my head. "Did you really think I would?" Trevor ran a hand through his hair, exhaling slowly. "No, but I figured I'd try anyway." I studied him, searching for sincerity, for anything that felt real. But it was the same Trevor, always playing angles, always looking for the next move. He wasn't sorry. He was just looking for a way back in. I took a step closer, lowering my voice. "You're not my problem anymore, Trevor. You never will be again." He nodded, but there was something in his eyes, something bitter, something desperate. "You really don't feel anything, do you?" I held his gaze, my expression unreadable. "No." For the first time, I saw it, the realization that there was nothing left between us. No anger, no pain, no unfinished business, just emptiness. Trevor picked up his drink, swirling the liquid inside. "Well," he said, forcing a smirk, "at least you're honest." I turned, walking away without another word. I never saw him again after that. Somewhere out there, Trevor Miller still existed. Maybe he had started over. Maybe he was still running from the mess he had made. But it didn't matter, because I had won. Not because I had taken everything from him, but because I had finally let him go. I never looked back after that night in New York. Trevor had become nothing more than a ghost, a passing shadow from a life I no longer lived, and for the first time in years, I felt truly free. There was no more waiting for the next shoe to drop, no more bracing myself for the next scheme, the next attempt to manipulate his way back into my world. He had tried everything, stealing from me, abandoning me, attacking my reputation, even using our son as leverage, and none of it had worked. He had lost. The months that followed were quiet in the best possible way. My business flourished, growing beyond what I had ever imagined. I spent my days building something real, something that belonged only to me, and my nights were filled with Caleb's laughter, his tiny hands reaching for mine, his sleepy murmurs as I tucked him into bed. Every time I looked at him, I knew I had done the right thing. He was safe, loved. He would never have to grow up questioning his worth, wondering why his father had walked away, because to him, Trevor Miller didn't exist. One day, when he was old enough to ask, I would tell him the truth, not out of anger or resentment, but because he deserved honesty. I would tell him that his father had been a man who made selfish choices, who walked away when things got hard, and who never truly knew what he had lost. But I would also tell him that none of it mattered, because we had built a life without him, and it was better than anything Trevor could have ever given us. One afternoon, I was sitting on the back patio of my home, watching Caleb play in the grass when my phone buzzed with a notification. I glanced down, expecting an email or a message from a friend, but instead it was a news alert. Former real estate agent Trevor Miller arrested for wire fraud and identity theft. I stared at the headline, a strange mix of emotions settling in my chest. It wasn't surprise. I had always known that men like Trevor didn't change. They just found new marks, new schemes, new ways to convince themselves they were too smart to ever truly fall. But eventually, they all did. I clicked on the article, skimming through the details. He had been caught falsifying documents, using stolen identities to secure loans, the same tricks he had once used on me, only now he had run out of people willing to clean up his mess. The mugshot at the bottom of the article barely looked like the man I once knew. He was thinner, older, his eyes hollow. The smug confidence that had once been his trademark was gone, replaced with something I couldn't quite name. I set my phone down, exhaling slowly. This was it, the final chapter, the last thread tying me to the past, unraveling before my eyes. Caleb toddled over to me, his chubby hands reaching for mine. I pulled him onto my lap, pressing a kiss to the top of his head. He giggled, curling into me, completely unaware of the weight of the moment. And that was how it should be. I looked out at the horizon, at the life I had built, at the future I had carved out for us. And then finally I let Trevor Miller go.